Hi guy, welcome back. TV spoilers reveal that Matt's case is no longer a scattered tip or a vague threat that the Newmans can manage through their usual procedures. It spreads like an oil slick. Too slow becomes deadly, too fast becomes careless. Nick understands that the moment he realizes this isn't simply ransom. It's a control game designed to fracture their composure from the inside out. He moves quickly to widen the search, forcing every lead into the light, forcing every connection to be rechecked until the effort feels suffocating. Yet the intensity of the hunt crashes into a brutal reality. Matt will not give them time. Matt chooses a direct strike, shoving Nick into a position where he must run and remain steady at the same time, because one misstep could cost Sienna her life. And when Matt produces video proof and demands $5 million, Nick doesn't just see a number, he sees a trap. $5 million isn't money alone. It's a declaration that Matt now holds the rhythm of this family's heartbeat, that every reaction will be bent to his will. The price is obscene, but what Nick fears most isn't losing cash. What freezes him is the sense that he's being forced into a war, where the other man has already ranged the board, has already calculated Nick's mistakes as part of the plan. He asks himself whether he is truly ready for the fight to track Matt down, whether he is simply being dragged forward by the panic of a man who has to save a life right now. Matt, meanwhile, makes no effort to hide his savagery. He doesn't need to appear civil or reasonable. He uses cruelty as a language, telling Nick without words that he will do anything. And he will do it with calm certainty. Sienna is drugged into helplessness, her body pulled away from her own control and placed into a state where someone else decides everything for her. Matt doesn't need her fully awake, he needs her awake only enough to serve his purpose. He rouses her with precision, like flipping a switch, just enough for her eyes to open, just enough for her lips to move, just enough for the camera to capture a convincing image that she is still alive. That act is not mercy, it is exploitation of life as a prop. It turns Sienna's existence into evidence, Noah's terror into fuel, and Nick's conscience into a weakness to be harvested. That coldness transforms the situation from negotiation into coercion, forcing reflexes driven by fear, forcing payment for a temporary breath. When Matt texts Nick and sets the meeting, Nick immediately sees two choices. Both poisonous: follow security protocol to protect himself and his team, or skip it to keep Matt from vanishing. Every instinct in Nick urges him to slow down, build safeguards, prepare contingencies. But the image of Sienna in that video hooks into his mind like a barb and yanks him toward the most reckless decision. He bypasses the security check because he fears that if he loses even one beat, Matt will run. Change locations, sever the only thread connecting them to Sienna. Nick knows he is doing something dangerous. He knows it's what Matt wants, a meeting where Nick arrives barehanded, stripping away his own defenses. Yet he also knows that extra barriers will read as resistance, and a man like Matt punishes resistance by making the victim suffer more. Nick chooses to surge forward, like someone plunging into icy water while clinging to the belief that hope's heat will be enough to withstand the shock. Elsewhere, Victor doesn't need many words for people to understand what he's thinking. He hints at another idea, and the way he keeps his breathing steady signals that he won't let Matt dictate the pace. Victor goes to the small house to update Noah, not because Noah needs more information, but because Noah needs something solid to hold onto. Noah has been split in two, one half desperate to believe Sienna still has a chance, the other half strangled by fear so tightly he can't afford to hope. Victor's presence delivers a silent message: they will not let go. They will not allow Matt to turn this into a perfect tragedy. Even Victor understands, though, that reassurance cannot erase the truth that everything is racing against time. Saying it will be handled sounds like a promise, but to Noah it also feels like a prayer because he has nothing else to cling to. In order to stay upright, the meeting point is a scenic overlook in the park, a place meant for quiet, for distance, for calm perspective. Matt chooses it as mockery. In open air, under light and wind, he stages a bargain saturated with threat. Nick arrives with his heartbeat sprinting but his face trained into restraint. Because he knows this, a man like Matt enjoys watching people tremble. Nick offers $1 million as a test, a way to measure whether Matt has any rational margin for negotiation. Matt refuses. He doesn't simply decline, he crushes the idea that Nick can set terms. Then Matt demands $5 million, decisive and unblinking. As though announcing a tax Nick must pay to keep what he loves. To make the number feel like real pain, Matt plays the video of Sienna. In that instant, Nick feels as though he's been struck in the chest. Part of him floods with relief that she's alive. But the relief is drowned immediately by disgust. Sienna is not fine. She is being held as an object, a hostage trapped in the narrow corridor between living and dying. The image is powerful enough to yank Nick away from logic and toward a reckless impulse. But he forces himself to hold the line. He pretends he needs time to gather the money, because he understands that instant compliance will only convince Matt. He can break Nick with pressure. Nick needs to stretch time, and not only to assemble funds, but to give Victor room to execute what Matt cannot see. Nick tries to turn delay into a move. Matt will not allow it. He insists he wants the money within 1 hour. An hour is not a deadline, it is a blade. It forces Nick to choose between two terrible options: surrender immediately, or risk losing control. And to make sure Nick doesn't gamble, Matt drops a threat about a completely different video Nick won't like. Nick understands what hides inside those words. That other video could be violence, irreparable harm, punishment recorded and delivered as proof. The mere thought turns Nick's spine cold. Rage rises, but he cannot let it drive him. He must keep playing the role of the negotiator, the strategist, while inside him a storm is screaming to tear everything apart and crush Matt with his own hands. Afterward, Nick reports the latest to Victor. The most important detail isn't the 5 million, it's that Matt is moving. Movement means Matt won't stand still to be caught. It also means he intends to keep them running in circles, grinding down their stamina until they make a mistake. Nick keeps his voice controlled, but his mind burns. He knows Victor will not sit idle. And sure enough, the news that Matt is on the move flips Victor's thinking into pursuit. If Matt believes he can relocate freely, Victor will turn every relocation into a trail. Victor will have someone track him, not to strike immediately, but to compress the space where Matt can hide until the man pulling strings becomes the man cornered by them. At the small house, Noah receives the confirmation that Sienna is still alive. He exhales as if surfacing after being held underwater for too long. But the worry crashes back in at once. Alive does not mean safe, it may be part of a vicious game they are destined to lose. Because Matt doesn't act for money alone. He acts for control and for the thrill of witnessing other people's agony. Noah is dragged between two poles. Hope makes him believe this can still be saved. Reality tells him Matt is cruel enough to kill Sienna even after the money is transferred. Powerlessness stretches Noah tight as wire. He isn't the negotiator, the commander. The one face to face with Matt, yet he is the one who might lose everything. His fear has its own shape, not loud, but corrosive, chewing at every breath. Making him blame himself for not protecting the woman he loves. Making him hate himself for being forced to wait while Sienna is held somewhere like property. Victor reassures Noah that it will be resolved. He doesn't reassure with softness, but with the hard certainty of someone who has lived through too many wars. To forget that panic only strengthens the enemy. Victor wants Noah to cling to something unshakable, the belief that there is still a path forward. That Nick is not alone, that Matt cannot win through brutality without consequence. Yet under that reassurance runs something deeper. Victor is reminding himself that he cannot fail Nick for pride, but because if he fails, this family fractures. He sees Noah being crushed by the sense of standing on the sidelines. And Victor needs to keep him from collapsing, because Noah's collapse could become its own kind of disaster. Meanwhile, Matt returns to the motel to meet Annie Stewart. The air there smells like plotting and complicity. Matt tells her about the new agreement he forced out of Nick and how easily he made Nick bend. If Nick experienced the Overlook meeting as a life-or-death chess match, Matt experiences it as performancy, an event he savors, because he holds the other man's breathing in his hand. Annie listens and understands that this has moved beyond business. It is a chain of actions that grows more extreme, more irreversible by the minute. And Matt makes it clear coldly, decisive that he has no intention of allowing Noah and Sienna to live happily ever after. When this is done, that statement, even without immediate action, thickens the atmosphere. It strips away the ransom surface and exposes the core. Matt wants an ending that leaves permanent wounds. In that moment, the horror stops being a prediction and becomes direction inside Matt's mind. He decides he will bury Sienna and Noah together in a permanent grave, as though turning pain into a symbol, turning their lives into a final punctuation mark. He writes himself. The idea reveals the distortion in Matt's motive. He doesn't only want money. He wants ultimate power, the power to decide who continues to exist and who is erased. The cruelty of burying them together cuts deeper because it targets the bond between Noah and Sienna, the most basic dream they have of surviving and living normally after all this. Matt wants to prove that their happiness isn't something to negotiate, it is something he can destroy. Outside the motel, time keeps moving with merciless precision. The hour Matt imposed doesn't squeeze Nick alone, it squeezes Victor, squeezes Noah, squeezes their ability to keep their minds from snapping. Nick is trapped between complying to keep Sienna alive a little longer and stretching time, so Victor's shadow can close in on Matt. Victor is trapped between the caution of someone who knows the value of each step, and the urgency of someone who knows delay can kill. Noah is trapped between faith and terror, between the impulse to run out and search for Sienna and the knowledge that any impulsive move could provoke Matt into acting faster. All three are fighting an enemy outside, but also battling voices inside themselves: panic, guilt, fury, despair. As night starts to settle, everything becomes more frightening because of the silence. The silence of footsteps following at a distance, the silence of messages not arriving, the silence of a clock counting down. Matt has named his price, shown his proof, said his hour, and seeded the threat of another video meant to shatter whatever remains of restraint. Nick knows each minute slipping away could be the minute Sienna is dragged over the edge. Victor knows each time Matt changes direction could carry him toward a place no one can reach in time. Noah knows every breath he takes without new information adds another layer of dread to his chest. Comfort now feels fragile because their opponent does not need a reason to be cruel. And this is where the hook tightens. Matt has promised a different video if the money doesn't come within the hour, while Nick is trying to stretch time long enough for Victor to keep pace. And Matt has already formed the idea of burying Noah and Sienna together in a permanent grave. As the clock nears the 1 hour mark, the question is no longer whether Nick can gather the money fast enough. The question is whether Matt will send that different video first or carry out the plan for the permanent grave first, and whether the people tracking him will recognize the exact moment he turns onto the road that leads straight to the place where every last piece of hope is meant to be buried alive. What happens to Matt Clark, the man who once hid behind the name Mitch Bacall, is no longer a vague rumor or a threat stretched out forever, just to keep viewers tense. As 2026 begins, the story's atmosphere shifts in a noticeable way. This is no longer a hunt in the shadows, but the moment the balance of power starts to tilt back toward the people who have been pushed to the edge. After everything Matt set in motion throughout 2025, the fear he planted is no longer treated like a temporary scare. It reads like a deep cut that has split open trust, safety, family stability, and the very idea of living normally. And because damage like that can't be repaired with a few reassuring words, Matt's outcome stops being a question of whether he will pay, it becomes a question of when, how, and whether the price will be heavy enough to end this cycle of violence for good. The phrase Matt Clark is taken down sounds clean and final, but it carries a darker weight than it seems, because it doesn't only describe the fate of a villain, it describes the exhaustion of everyone he has dragged into his orbit, nights without sleep, the choices made with a throat-tightening sense of pressure, the habit of looking over your shoulder because danger could arrive at any second. When someone like Matt finally gets pushed to the point of consequences, it isn't a spotless victory, not a cleansing storm that restores everything. It's the moment the hurricane finally passes, leaving behind broken ground, splintered structures, and survivors who have to stand in the wreckage and ask themselves how much of themselves they had to sacrifice just to reach this day. The 2026 revelations make it clear that viewers don't need to fear Matt lingering like a permanent ghost. He will pay for the evil he committed in 2025, and that price will be big enough that he exits the canvas within a few weeks after New Year's. On the surface, that sounds like relief. But under the relief, a harder question keeps pulsing: can his disappearance actually give anything back to the people he harmed? And will Matt's ending feel like justice or simply a technical conclusion that allows the story to pivot while the emotional wound continues to bleed? For those who lived under Matt's threat, the idea of him being gone doesn't mean life immediately returns to normal. It simply means they may finally get a chance to breathe without checking every lock twice. At the center of that storm stand Nick Newman and Sharon Newman. Revenge is a heavy word, sometimes harsh, yet for them it isn't just impulsive anger or a desire to watch the villain suffer. It's a survival reflex sharpened by the terror of losing their child, fueled by the sickening realization that someone felt entitled to turn their family into prey. During Matt's reign, Nick and Sharon weren't only fighting a dangerous man, they were fighting the idea that a person could get close enough to make their son's life a bargaining chip. Once you've stared into that kind of fear, you don't return to being the same kind of parent. You become vigilant, suspicious, permanently braced, always wondering whether calm is just the pause before the next strike. That is why the promise to protect their son at any cost is not a slogan. It's an oath carved into raw nerves because they know the cost of failure isn't a lesson. It's a catastrophe. Nick's fury has discipline. He doesn't easily allow emotion to become recklessness, but the emotion is still there, hot, heavy, constantly threatening to erupt each time he remembers being maneuvered, cornered, forced into choices where every option tasted like loss. Nick understands that revenge without control could turn him into the very kind of monster he despises. But he also understands that if he softens, if he simply lets it pass, Matt becomes the kind of man who learns he can do it again to someone else. So Nick's revenge is also a statement of family power. No one crosses this line without being dragged into consequence. It is a motive that feels both righteous and dangerous, because it pushes Nick onto a narrow ledge between protection and obsession, between justice and the need to punish simply to feel control return to his hands. Sharon's anger is different, deeper, less predictable because it's fused to maternal instinct and long-held fatigue. Sharon doesn't only want Matt gone, she wants his presence erased, wants him stripped of any power to manufacture another nightmare. To Sharon, protecting her son isn't only physical safety. It's guarding Noah from psychological fallout that could linger for years, from the warping of trust, from the internal message that love and the future can be buried alive by one ruthless man. Sharon understands that because she has watched the aftermath in her son's eyes, watched him strain just to stay upright, watched fear reshape his breathing. And once a mother has seen her child pushed to that edge, her anger cannot be soothed by promises. It can only quiet when the threat is truly eliminated. But this is where the story introduces a quieter, more personal conflict. While Nick and Sharon are focused on making Matt pay, they are also forced to confront something private and complicated: the possibility of romantic reconnection. When a massive threat pulls people into alignment through a shared mission to protect their child, that closeness can feel like the return of old love. Yet love isn't a room you reopen after years and find untouched. It gathers dust. It warps under time. It thins under repeated disappointment and unspoken pain. The question of Schick is not simply whether feelings remain, it is whether they have the courage to face everything that broke them before, while they are still shaking from Matt's aftershocks. Nick may feel something familiar in standing beside Sharon again, the old sense of we. The shared breath, the shared purpose centered on Noah. But he may also wonder if this closeness is a product of crisis rather than a true rebirth. Crisis creates adrenaline. It creates the urge to grab something familiar so you don't fall. Sharon may be asking herself the same question in a different form. Is she reaching for love or for safety? When the world becomes dangerous, familiarity can be mistaken for destiny. Sharon is not someone who survives on fantasy, though. She knows that some reunions begin in shared war and collapse the moment the war ends, because that's when two people finally have to look at each other and at the empty spaces between them that were temporarily filled by the urgency of a common enemy. The cruelty is that they don't get to choose the timing. While Matt remains a threat, Nick and Sharon must stay focused, must coordinate, must maintain a united front. But even if Matt exits the canvas within a few weeks after New Year's, what he leaves behind may still wedge itself between them. When the storm passes, exhaustion arrives. And exhaustion brings questions you can't dodge. What happens after? Do they hold each other because they truly want to, or because they're afraid of being alone with the possibility of another nightmare? If they reunite, do they rebuild from love or from the fear of losing Noah? If they don't reunite, can they still co-parent without turning the past into a blade every time they brush against it? In all of this, Noah and Sienna are not side notes. They are the living center of the cost Matt is threatening to extract up to, and including their lives. That threat is not just a line of suspense, it shadows every decision Nick and Sharon make. Each time Nick thinks of Noah, he doesn't see only an adult son with his own agency, he sees a part of himself that could be torn away forever. Sharon, each time she thinks of Noah and Sienna, can't look from a distance. She sees a future being cut short. She sees ordinary things, morning routines, a hand held, a simple plan becoming luxuries under Matt's control. That is why the tension never fully eases. Even with the promise that Matt will be taken down soon, they can't relax. Because the most dangerous man is the one who knows he's running out of road. A man like Matt, cornered, may want to drag the most precious things with him as a final act of spite. At this stage, Matt's motive doesn't need new twists to feel terrifying. The logic of cruelty is enough. He did too much in 2025 for consequences to be optional. But a man facing consequences rarely wants to disappear quietly. He may want a final imprint and ending that curses everyone else. That is why the line about Noah and Sienna paying with their lives isn't just fear-mongering. It locks every character into a brutal mental state, desperate to end this fast, but terrified that ending it fast will trigger Matt's most violent last move. That contradiction creates invisible pressure, making every step feel like it could touch a wire. Nick and Sharon are forced to accept a bitter truth. Protecting Noah may require sacrificing their own peace. Nobody walks out of this unchanged. Nick may become harder, less trusting, quicker to ignite at any sign of danger. Sharon may become more sensitive to fear and more ruthless in response than she ever expected of herself. They can share a target and still collide in how they endure the fallout. And that difference is where the shit question tightens like a cord. Love can grow from unity, but it can also suffocate under injuries neither person knows where to place. If Matt truly disappears within a few weeks after New Year's, Noah and Sienna may feel a fragile wave of relief. But that relief will be thin, because it can't erase the fact that they lived under someone who wanted to destroy them. Even if the physical threat ends, the aftershocks remain: hypervigilance, the reflex to expect the worst, the belief that happiness can be stolen in an instant. For Noah, the heaviest price may not be survival alone, it may be whether he can still believe in a future. For Sienna, being alive will not automatically mean being free. Once freedom has been stripped away, reclaiming it isn't one dramatic leap, it is 1,000 quiet moments of convincing yourself the monster is no longer standing behind the door. Nick and Sharon, meanwhile, stand at the intersection of endings and beginnings. Matt's fall could open a new start for them, but not a glossy one. It's like reopening a room after a fire. It's still the same room, but smoke clings to the walls. Scorch marks remain, and you have to decide whether you'll stay and rebuild or close the door and walk away. If they consider reconnection, they must face the hardest question: do they love each other enough to heal together? Or are they only clinging because they share the same fear? And if they don't reunite, can they still move as partners in parenting without letting history cut them open? Each time they touch it, the most intense tension isn't in the promise that Matt will be taken down, it's in the time before it happens. Within a few weeks after New Year's is a window that feels both close and dangerously long. Close enough to create hope the nightmare is ending. Long enough for something terrible to happen before the final period is placed. That waiting period is where people break net at the last blow. But in the days spent living in the not knowing, Nick must keep himself from rushing forward on anger. Sharon must keep fear from steering her into extremes. Noah must keep from collapsing under the sense that he and Sienna are suspended over a blade. And Sienna must keep from drowning in despair while knowing there is a man willing to make their deaths his own finale. And the hook is waiting inside the collision of three truths. Matt is about to be taken down. Nick and Sharon are prepared to do anything to protect Noah. And Noah and Sienna are still hanging beneath Matt's threat of death, as the darkness of 2025 hasn't fully lifted yet. The most terrifying question isn't how Matt will be removed, it's what final mark he intends to leave behind before he is dragged out of the game. And whether the exact moment Nick and Sharon believe they've reached victory will be the moment they realize their son is closer than ever to the edge.